This is the first interview we're doing on this channel, and there couldn't be a better interview partner than Elena Esposito for this. Elena Esposito is a professor of sociology in both Bologna and Bielefeld. And she's in Bielefeld because that's also where she got her PhD. She was a student of Niklas Luhmann, in my personal opinion, one of the best. And now she's also teaching sociology there. She wrote a number of books, all in the tradition of social systems theory, but applying social systems theory to a diverse number of topics like fashion, a book on fashion that was quite popular in Germany about 20 years ago, right, Elena? Maybe.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, I don't know exactly, but
and then much more recently, the book on the finance industry, or the future of futures. Elena's most recent book has just been published by MIT Press. The title is Artificial Communication: How Algorithms Produce Social Intelligence. And I saw the book is, of course, available on Amazon, but it's also available actually for free download on the MIT Press website, which I found quite interesting. So we'll put a link to the book on the MIT Press website. So the first question is a general question about the main theme of the book. So you're proposing the notion of artificial communication instead of artificial intelligence. Can you explain just generally to our viewers, why do you think it's important to basically switch from the concept of artificial intelligence to the concept of artificial communication?
Well, sure. Thanks a lot. Well, the starting idea was something which is quite widespread in the field. So a growing dissatisfaction with the idea of artificial intelligence, because especially since the most recent algorithms were working with machine learning using big data, and also these algorithms which are like deep learning, more and more opaque, not understandable for the users. The idea is spreading that actually these machines are not trying to be intelligent. They're not trying to reproduce in an artificial way the process of human thought. They're doing something different. And it's rarely said so explicitly, but sort of the feeling is, you can find it in many different contexts. The problem is, if we switch away from the idea of intelligence, what can we refer to? Do we have another metaphor that would be more fitting to the current situation than the idea of artificial reproduction of intelligence? Me as a sociologist, I tend to refer to communication. And the idea is basically quite simple, that what we are reproducing with this machine is not an artificial way to multiply consciousness or intelligence in the way we do it, but rather a way to make more effective with the technological procedure, social communication. So I started to think about the possible alternative metaphor referring to communication than to intelligence. So we are not really interested in producing other consciousness. We are interested in having a communication that becomes more effective, or effective in a different way. Therefore, also the title of the book, because the book said how artificial algorithms produce social intelligence, switching the intelligence to society, because in the way we communicate, we can have more intelligence. We can have information that were not possible before these smart algorithms. But that doesn't require that the algorithms themselves are intelligent. That doesn't seem to me empirically the case.
You used a few times the word metaphor, and you said, you're switching from the metaphor of artificial intelligence to the metaphor of artificial communication. I wonder if that's really what you mean. I mean, isn't it the case that at least a lot of people who talk about artificial intelligence actually think that algorithms or AI is somehow actually intelligent, maybe in a different way intelligent than minds are intelligent. But I think it's more than a metaphor. And I also had the impression, correct me if I'm wrong, that you also using communication in the concept of artificial communication, not just as a metaphor.
No, you're perfectly right. I wasn't just sloppy referring to metaphor, because I was referring to the general trend that they say artificial intelligence as a metaphor. So I was referring to this, but in the way I use it, you are right. I really think that's not a metaphor. What I want to explore is actually a new form, or a different or new or different, a particular form of communication, not a metaphor. You're perfectly right. And you're also right that also speak of artificial intelligence is not really a metaphor, not only because some people take it seriously, but even more on the other side, because I think since we actually don't really know what intelligence is, natural intelligence it would be a strange metaphor referring to something, an artificial refer to something which we don't exactly know what it is.
Yes. And I mean, to me, at least, this is the almost revolutionary challenge of your book, that you're actually saying the notion of artificial intelligence is not simply metaphorically wrong. It's actually conceptually wrong. I saw this as the kind of the strongest thesis of your book, that there is kind of an inbuilt conceptual mistake in the notion of artificial intelligence, which leads to a misconceptualization of a lot of things that artificial intelligence does.
Well, that's very generous, but that's actually what I was trying to explore in the case of the idea that as we move from intelligence to communication, we can see some things differently, and I hope more effectively. And on the other side, we can abandon some worries or topics which have been bothering us for so many years, and I don't think they're very effective. For example, what in a sense fascinated me is that we are referring since 100 years to the Turing test, which is actually a sort of a comparison between human intelligence and alleged intelligence of the machines, which is completely irrelevant since so long, but still is the point of reference to check if are the machine more intelligent than us, or are we somehow, and people usually tend to be more happy if you can show that we are more intelligent than the machine, a kind of competition that I think is not really effective.
Right.
And by the way, in that case, the machine would have won since long, and is completely irrelevant. Or the fear of the so-called singularity, the moment, the dreadful moment where the machine becomes more intelligent. I don't think it's a real problem, because they are not intelligent.
Right.
That's not.
Exactly. So I
there
think
are many things
it's
to worry about
hugely
with
misleading. That's why I think your book is so important, because that is not really challenged. I mean, there's so much philosophical reflection on AI, which should be called AC, but this core problem is hardly ever addressed. And again, that's why I think your book is so important. Now, let me ask more concretely. So, if artificial intelligence is actually not intelligent and doesn't think, and should be called artificial communication, what does it actually do? Can you describe this a little bit more concretely?
Yeah, then of course it becomes more technical. We should refer to some examples. Let's start from the beginning. Why do people think about intelligence? Because machines, when we interact with machines, we get information we wouldn't get otherwise, and they cannot be attributed to any human beings. The machine, in a sense, processes the data and produces some information, which is not only didn't exist before, but is also sort of reacting to our request. So in the sense, the machine does exactly what we do when we communicate with a human being. We ask something, something is processed, which we interpret as information, and we get some information we didn't have before. And that's what happens also with the machines. That's why I think that the image, the reference to communication can be effective in this regard. And that's also understandable that people thought about artificial intelligence, because since thousands of years, we have communicated with human beings who are intelligent, and thereby they can produce something which allows us to get new information. So if now we have another object that had the same performance, we tend to think it is intelligent because human beings can do that because they are intelligent. So that's how the setting is. The question now is, how can this machine have the same performance that we human beings have by being intelligent without being intelligent themselves? And here, I think the reference to the new development with machine learning and big data come in, because actually computer have never been intelligent in a sense, but it was more difficult to see that. But now, since the Web 2.0, since the participatory web and the big data, and since we have these algorithms which are deeply obscure, impenetrable, it's quite clear they are doing something different. And it's quite clear, I think that one can have hints. Where do they get the clues that allow them to act as if they were intelligent? Because the algorithm access the web, use the big data, and process in their own way the input that we or participant put on the web. So the idea is the machine is they produce something that can become intelligent because they, in a sense, parasitically use the intelligent behavior of all of us on the web, all the traces that we consciously or unconsciously put on the web, and reprocess this to react in a competent way to our request and to produce something which becomes a form of communication. So there's always intelligence in the sense of the starting point, but it's not the intelligence of the machine. It's the intelligence of the user that behave on the web, produce unpredictable, we say technically contingent behavior that then the machine can process to become itself apparently contingent or intelligent.
Right. So basically you're saying, I mean, just to go back to that main theme, because we are used to, when we communicate among humans, we're used to communicate with people who are intelligent. So that's why, by default, we think whenever there's communication, there must be intelligence. And that's a kind of prejudice that we, without reflection, then also apply to communication with algorithms. But in fact, it's a conceptual mistake that we're making. Is that correct?
I definitely agree that will be, which is understandable, of course, because as long as we don't have an alternative reference, which is communications can be seen since 10, 15 years, not before, well, it would be difficult to have another conceptual point.
Now, in the book, you have a number of chapters that deal with very kind of concrete forms of artificial communication. And interestingly, you describe them by basically doing historical comparisons. One is that you show how artificial communication operates a lot with listings, basically making lists. And this is basically a communication strategy that we can trace back long before the times of current technology. So can you tell us a little bit more about this interesting parallel?
Yeah, you're perfectly right. That's how I try to work in the book, because I see some phenomena which struck me as new, as interesting, as surprising, and I try to elaborate with sociological background to see where they can be located, where historical. Often you work historically because the best way to have comparisons. And algorithms work a lot with lists. They use instructions which are lists. They produce list of results. Think about the list of results we get in Google. And so lists are multiplying everywhere. Also in the way we communicate through the web, through listicles, to a new form of journal article, to a new form of organization of information. So I started thinking about the list, and I knew from anthropological research that lists have a long tradition, but in a sense they were very widespread in ancient civilization at the beginning of writing, which seems far away, but I think it's connected with my general approach, because the idea was at the beginning of writing, well, there's a general cultural thesis that says alphabetic writing is needed to have form of abstract thought. And the origin goes back to Plato, to ancient Greece, where the question is, why exactly in that time, in that place, there was the rules of our abstract way of elaborating content produced? And some interesting research, quite with a lot of agreement now, connect this beginning of abstract thought with alphabetic writing. So for many, many reasons. So the question was what happened before. And there were forms of writing before alphabetic writing, before real abstraction, that produced remarkable accomplishments. Think about the Mesopotamian culture, which had a very interesting form of writing and produced our algebra, our arithmetics, amazing astrological observation, and amazing results, which are not forms of abstract thought. And this civilization used a lot lists. Lists were very, very widespread there. And the very simple hypothesis from anthropologists is that lists are very useful. You need a form of writing, of course, to make lists, but not alphabetic writing, and are a very useful tool because you can, sort of represent, write down all the elements you are referring to, one after the other, or in a list or tables on, and then see. Compare them, see when structures appear, when patterns appear, and use them to organize your items in a different way, producing also really, really very fascinating results. And so the idea was with lists, you can have a form of working with the context that can be very effective, but doesn't require abstraction, or it does require our abstract form of intelligence. And now we see where I'm heading to, because actually that happened before our form of abstract thought connecting with writing. And that happens with algorithms today because they sort these materials without themselves being able or requiring abstract thought. They work in a different way, looking for structures, looking for patterns through the simple juxtaposition of objects or see how the things are organized. We don't need of having an abstract thought themselves. Right.
That would maybe just be somehow disturb the whole process if you would move to further abstractions. A second interesting parallel you point out in the book, that's another chapter, is where you basically say that the way that algorithms are often used today for kind of prediction purposes, that this is surprisingly parallel to traditional divination technologies. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's again another similar case where I'm working on prediction, in algorithm prediction. I have a big project financed by the European Research Council about forms of algorithm prediction. So that's the topic I was looking at. And as you say, algorithms are more and more used for predicting purposes now. But if you look at how the things is described, it's really strange. It's a strange form of prediction, very different from the form of prediction we are used to, which is mostly probabilistic. And there were some formulations that struck me as really unusual. In many books, in many research on so-called predictive analytics, you find formulation almost wordly as algorithm can see the future, the past, and the present. Or algorithm can, for the first time, allow us to overcome the limitation that we cannot see the future in advance. And I've been working on divination for other purposes for many years, and I saw that actually the formulation were almost precisely the same that you can find in ancient divinatory culture. That not algorithm, but God or some kind of higher entity can see the future in advance, because the ideas for God, the past, the present, the future are all contemporary. There's no difference. It's only for our human being that the future is unknown and the past becomes obscure and we are stuck to the present, while God could see all these different time horizons. And now you find this information with algorithms, and I was wondering why. So I looked in the way the predictions produced by algorithm are, with the shape they have, the form they have, and it's also the form of the algorithm prediction is very similar to the form of divinatory prediction. Some features, for example, our forms of prediction in our modern culture are always probabilistic. You know something about an average trend, how the stock market will go. A certain probability, 70%, the weather forecast, or how people will behave in some case, 70%, 80%, they get ill and so on. While divinatory predictions are very individual. How will my marriage go? How will this fight end? When do I have so wheat and so on? Me today in this condition is an individual kind of prediction, which is exactly what algorithms also produce. Algorithms don't tell you anything about averages. They tell you very punctual, specific, personalized prediction about your specific illness, your specific trend, and so on. Exactly like divinatory form. Plus, divinatory predictions tend always to be performative. So there were a deep awareness that the prediction changes the condition of the future. Right. Things about Oedipus, for example. No? The prediction is there, and whatever he does cannot change the future. Right. The prediction changes the future by itself. And that's something which is deeply there in formal algorithm prediction. Yes. People exploit this. People talk about preemption. They know that. Think about also, for example, marketing procedures. The algorithm proposes you to buy a product which you didn't know before. So the proposal of the algorithm, if it works, of course, produces the future which wouldn't have been there without the activity of the algorithm. So the prediction fulfills itself, also defeats itself, but in the end affects the condition of the future. And that's something which in our culture, in our modern culture, we know that, but we are not really well equipped to deal with. The performative aspect of prediction has already been an annoyance, not
kind of scandalous. I mean, that's an interesting thing, right? With prediction, from a purely rational perspective, we think the prediction should just predict, but not have an influence on what it predicts. We think that's somehow unfair, right? Yeah. Because then the prediction kind of contributes to that what it predicted to actually, become a fact. Then we somehow think that's unfair, and that's somehow scandalous. But both in divination and in algorithm, that's not the case, right? We somehow want that. Right, and we are aware of it. Like also in divination, right? The divination question, whatever in ancient Chinese history or so, it's not just to have like an objective prediction of the future. You want to somehow influence the future in a way that you wish it to be. And of course, the same thing is the case with the algorithms. We don't just want like an objective, neutral trajectory toward the future, but we want to listen to the song in 20 minutes that we actually like to listen to, and we don't just want an arbitrary prediction of what might be statistically whatever the likelihood that we listen to the song. We want this kind of interference somehow. Mm-hmm.
Or I definitely agree with you, but we are also like struggling between the different attitudes. On the one hand, we would like to see in advance what happens. On the other hand, we have to recognize that, now sociology said from a sociological point of view, the future doesn't exist yet. The future will be produced also, but what we do today, and what we do today is also oriented to the predictions we have. So there's a circularity in the production of the future, therefore affects prediction, which, as you rightly said, have been ignored for so long time for very reasonable reasons. So they're connected to our culture. And now we are starting to adopt a different attitude, which had roots also, for example, in pre-modern way of thinking.
Right. Thanks for explaining this, Elena. I want to go back to the first issue that we discussed, the relation or let's say the misnaming of artificial communication as artificial intelligence. In your book, you refer to this example that, for instance, in the attempt to create artificial flying objects, planes, people try to imitate somehow birds, and that never really worked. And there was only really progress made in the technology once we gave up imitating birds. And something similar seems to have happened with computer technology. Once you no longer try to imitate, in this case, human intelligence, actually there is technological process. And yet, we still have the same metaphor, right? We call planes sometimes like birds or so metaphorically. And as we said at the beginning, we still speak of computer technology as artificial intelligence. And the reason that we do this, as we said earlier, is because obviously these machines, these artificially produced mechanisms, they do somehow participate in communication, right? Now, that's a core question, and this brings us back to Luhmann, that Luhmann asked himself, namely about the relation between communication or society, because for him, society is, by definition, a communication system, and minds or thinking, that is psychic systems for him. And so for him, the question was, unlike in the philosophical Western tradition, where we often had the mind-body problem, where there was the idea, the main question was, how is the mind connected to the body? One of the main questions for Luhmann was, how is the mind, how is thinking connected to society, to communication? And he has one core article on this. How does the mind participate in communication? That's the English translation of the article. And I think the translation into English is somewhat misleading. The German term that he uses, I think, is, wie ist Bewusstsein an Kommunikation beteiligt? Now, this is a passive wording. He doesn't say, like in English, if you have the phrase, how does the mind participate in communication? In German, this would be, wie nimmt das Bewusstsein an Kommunikation teil? But it's not an active grammatically phrasing, it's a passive phrasing. Because actually what Luhmann is saying in this article is, and this leads, because of the English translation, which is technically correct, but misleading, to a lot of misunderstandings, because he says very clearly that minds cannot communicate, and they do not communicate. They only think. Their operation is thinking and feeling and other mental things. They do mental things. That's why they are minds, because they operate mentally, whereas communication operates via communication. And these are two operationally closed systems. And yet, for him, the question is, how is it possible that how do the two, so to speak, hang together? And so there is some form of Beteiligtsein, but the Beteiligtsein is something, I think the proper translation would be something, how is the mind involved in communication? Because it influences communication a lot, right? Communication wouldn't be what it is if there weren't minds somehow involved in it, but not paradoxically, but interestingly, without actually participating in it, right? The minds do not communicate. To give an example, I was thinking in preparation for our talk, how to explain this. Then I was thinking, let's think about a concert, and you have a concert, the event organizer, whatever, the managers, and you can say the managers are definitely involved in the concert, right? Without them, the concert wouldn't take place. But they're not participating in the concert in the strict sense how we use this phrase. They're not on the stage. And I think somewhat similarly, the idea that Luhmann has of the relationship and the relation, which is super important from a philosophical perspective, and again, it's an age-old problem. It's just now conferred to from mind-body to mind communication. And again, that for me, from a philosophical perspective, that's really, really a core aspect on your book, how you basically take this Luhmannian idea that there is something outside of communication that is involved in communication without actually communicating. And isn't that the case that what you're basically showing in various ways, for instance, with respect to lists and divination, everything we talked about, how, no, I can't say artificial intelligence, how algorithms are somehow involved within communication without actually communicating, not like in a different way, just as birds fly different from planes, also artificial communication somehow is involved in communication, but in a different way than minds are involved in communication. Did I get this right? And can you maybe say a little more, if this is right, how algorithms are involved in communication without literally participating in communication?
Yeah, you're perfectly right. I agree completely. And you point out to one of the most difficult aspects in this concept of artificial communication. Of course, I'm in Bielefeld. I have many friends working with the system theory, and the concept has been accepted and rejected at the same time, because exactly for the reason you refer, because it's not neutral, it's not painless to talk about the artificial communication for the reason that you say. Let me say a little more to this Luhmann's idea of the relation between minds or Bewusstsein and communication. On a very general level, Luhmann says only communication can communicate, as you say, but it requires a lot of environmental requirements in order to work. No? So communication can go on if the environment cooperates and offers elements that are needed for communication, which includes all kinds of things. Gravity force, temperature at being a certain range, we need water, we need air, we need a lot of things, otherwise communication couldn't go on. And that's a general environmental requirement, which goes in under the very general concept systems here of structural coupling. So the communication is coupled with some environmental requirements. Different is the case of consciousness, because that's why your example with the organizer of the concert is right, but not completely, because the organizer of a concert is sort of a general structural requirement environment. What Luhmann describes about communication and Bewusstsein and psychic systems is a little more, because the gravity force is there, must be there. But in order for a communication to happen, there must be, at least in general, two Bewusstseins, consciousness, participating into that. That's why it speaks participating, beteiligt on this form. That means we can go on, think about ourselves and not to participate in communication at all. But we can devote our thoughts to the content of the communication. For example, me and you now, you can think about yourself, what you want to do tonight, if you are hungry, if you are tired, if you are in a bad mood or in good mood. Or you can listen to what I'm saying and focus your thought, sort of connect your thought with what I'm saying, but which, of course, you don't have any access to my thoughts. I simply do something that through communication, as system theory says, irritates, if you want, your thoughts in order to produce something which, if it works out, produce some information which is your information, different from mine. And so that's how communication goes on. So the idea that in the case of consciousness, structural coupling becomes more strict, because it's not just an environmental background. It's an actual operation of the psychic system that's to be devoted to the actual operation of the social system. That's why they coincide in this event. My psychic event is coupled to a communicative event, and yours too, and the one of everybody's listening. So it's a stronger requirement. And that makes the concept of artificial communication, in a sense, tricky, because I propose it because I think empirically what's going on in the interaction with algorithms is so close to communication that we have to try to find a way to extend, to expand, or to amend, or to change the concept of communication, also to include what's going on, because there's something that cannot be described in any other way than through reference to communication, or I cannot describe it in any other way. Nevertheless, it's not exactly the same. Because it's not that there's in the technique of the communication is similar. It's production of information. A system is irritated. Someone has to produce information connected to what the algorithm is saying. But the algorithm itself is not thinking, is not producing any new communication. It's just sort of conveying something that, can produce other information somewhere else. It's exactly from the point of view of Luhmann, my background is completely Luhmannian, but what I'm proposing, without wanting to amend Luhmann, just maybe to extend, I try to describe something which is, in any case, different from the standard case of communication.
All right, let's move on to a final point. I want to talk, if that's okay, about artificial communication and profilicity. One of the chapters in your book opens up with a personal story. So you're describing how you hiked many hours into the Grand Canyon with your partner. And then when you reached your destination, some sort of scenic spot, another hiker showed up. But rather than enjoying the view, she only asked you to take a picture of her in front of the scenery, which is, of course, something that I guess every one of us is used to. And then she just immediately walked on. And then you relate her behavior to social media usage and describe it as, and here I'm quoting, escaping the pressure of the present rather than preserving experiences and memories. And this seemed to be a little bit critical of the hiker. Can you explain that?
No, it doesn't want to be critical because I'm fascinated by what's going on social media. And I know that the connection works, because that's why I read with a lot of fascination your work on profilicity. There's something going on about the way we build our identity on social media, which I think is not described by our current categories. And I was referring to photographs, the way people take photographs. I think I write this piece in the chapter. People are not stupid, they're not superficial. They do something different because the communicative situation have changed and people deal in a different way with these technological accomplishments. And so photographs clearly are not, digital photographs have not the same purpose of analogic photographs. I'm a digital migrant, so I remember how we took photographs, and photograph tradition were taken to preserve memories, to deepen them later, to keep a moment from the course of time, and to be able to look at it later. And what's going on now seems to be something different. Think about Snapchat. Pictures are taken, put on Snapchat and destroyed. So there's no preservation there. So the function might be something different. Right. Not because people are stupid, not because superficial, because they're doing something different.
Right, exactly.
And I was thinking about something, it's not completely worked out. I just tried to put some hints there. But also in the way of dealing with images, with photographs, there were reflections, Susan Sontag or Doherty, they say, actually, photographs are, in a sense, what Susan Sontag said, images can usurp realities. With images, with photographs, we sort of get away from the pressure of reality and try to do something different. But it was sort of an analogical space. Now with digital, it seems to be something even more, that we use photographs when the pressure of reality is too heavy, which means always today. Because in our rich society, we always have the pressure of the present, the only time we can accomplish something, and we are never attentive enough to do everything what should be done. We don't never have enough information to really work out, control what's going on. And you are there in a present, in such an important moment. For example, the Grand Canyon, you walk down for 4 hours, you walk up for 6, is so heavy and so overwhelming. And then the moment is gone, and you don't process ever all the fullness of this experience. You know that, you're aware of that. A lot of things are gone, and then you are not considered, then you are gone. Or people in museums, you watch these amazing pictures, and there's so much you lose in the moment. And that's an awareness that we have. It's a basic one for our society. And I thought pictures seems to be a way to deal with that, because in front of this pressure, you take a picture, and the picture relieves it from this pressure, in a sense. You share it with someone else. You refer to a later time on which you probably will never see it. So there's a new way to try to escape the pressure of the present. That was the idea. Not completely worked out, but something different from what we were doing with photographs before.
Yes, mainly I misunderstood your intentions there. But let me explain again from my philosophical perspective why I was talking about this. Because I'm interested in identity and how personal identity is shaped. And I think that this is different in social media, right? And under the influence of algorithms. And that it challenges the notion of authentic identity building. And a lot of the discourse, the criticism about social media and algorithm is that it somehow destroys authenticity. And there is an interesting, not very well-known short essay by Heidegger, one of the main philosophers of authenticity, who also criticizes photo taking as basically a violation of the demand for being authentic, right? He has this kind of hilarious travel diary of his trip to Greece, which his wife bought him. And so he went on this tourist ship in the late 50s or early 60s. With all these normal tourists traveling to the tourist sites in Greece, to all these ancient Greek things. And then he gets increasingly annoyed by the fellow travelers and about their constant touristic-like behavior, and especially chastises them for taking photos all the time, right? And so he says something like they throw away their memory, and they're incapable of being authentic and authentically facing this kind of these wonderful historical relics and all the philosophical meaning that's attached to them. So they're incapable, because of the technology they use and because of the photo taking, of existing in the mode of authenticity. He doesn't put it in these words, but on the background of his philosophy, that's basically what he's, so to speak, bitching about. And so I saw something similar, because that's a reaction that I guess a lot of our viewers and myself also have, because, you see this all the time, people taking photos, and we get some sort of immediate reaction from having the prejudice of authenticity, is this kind of annoyance and this suspicion that they're not really authentic. And I had some sort of feeling like this when I was reading this in your book, that it somehow echoed the very common that in part I also emotionally share, this idea that this represents a violation of authenticity that is somehow not okay, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, from my philosophical perspective, I think, none of us really is authentic, and we've never really been authentic. And somehow by, using all these new technologies, and by operating in this kind of taking photos for posting kind of mode, we are actually using a different identity technology, not authenticity, but profilicity. And I don't think that this necessarily takes away something of the intensity of the moment, because that's also something I read in your passage, right? I read your passage in such a way, because the person only goes there for taking the photo, and then just asks you the photo, doesn't take in the scenery at all, the person is somehow, not like really existing in the proper kind of real mode. Now, I would say that, for instance, right now, while we are talking, right, we're having the conversation, and in one way or another are authentically involved. But at the same time, we're also recording, and we're both aware of recording the conversation, which we both agreed before starting the recording. That makes us both a little bit nervous, because we know it's going to be posted to an audience whom we do not know. But we both want it. And part of why we're doing the conversation is kind of like this person took the 4 hours hike in order to post the photo. Somehow we wrote our books in order to record this conversation and then post it. And I think that's somehow similar, that we've never really been authentic, right? And there has been always an element of profilicity that's been mixed in our authenticity. And in German, we could say it's something das wir nicht wahrhaben wollen, something that we don't want to be true. Right. And so I think this resistance that we see, and that a certain resistance that you also describe in that moment, and a resistance against artificial communication, a resistance against algorithm, comes from the fact that it makes it very obvious that we are not merely authentic, but that if we communicate, which is what what your book is about. If we are communicating with algorithms, we are kind of, by definition, not just simply authentic. And that, again, is something that was wir nicht wahrhaben wollen, right? We try to somehow, preserve the vocabulary. And maybe that's also why we still like to call artificial communication artificial intelligence, because it somehow makes it kind of more comfortable for us, right? Because we can somehow, as you said earlier, relate to the algorithms as if it would be capable to relate to them as we relate somehow to another mind.
Yeah. I agree. But I still, not by, and I see some other aspect connected with that. Because think about the example of the Grand Canyon or people going to museums. I think your description is too generous, because actually it could be the case. It's not always the case. In some cases, you have the impression people are actually escaping the context. Not always. You describe a condition where you are there, you are in the here and now, and you post a picture to deal with your identity in a different way, without hypostatizing with the authenticity, without giving authenticity this overcharged meaning. And you also have a more flexible way to deal with that. That's not always the case, because what seems to be a new development, without any critical aspect, I'll tell you something about that. I'm very fascinated by that too. Is apparently the context is gone. The person doesn't look at the view at all. This post in the photo is a substitute for the present, the here and now. People in museums don't look at the object. I know it is, but that's why the last part of the article refers to a new way of using something which in our society now is absolute luxus. Going to a place in a real space, you go and visit an exhibit, you have to move your body, bring it there, and be in that space in that moment. And the exhibits are, since some decades, reacting to that. So you don't go to the museum nowadays to watch the Mona Lisa or to watch the Pollock or what you want. You go there to be in a curated space, right, where the picture is compared with other pictures, with the light. What the exhibit offers is an experience in the here and there. Exactly the opposite of what you can take with a camera. So what I'm fascinated by is a sort of a coexistence of a possibility of a more intense contextual experience, and the opposite. With picture, we escape the context and we spread the experience in a different way. which is for me the new interesting moment. And of course, there are critical moments. People can be stupid the way of watching museums, but not because of the picture, because all things can happen in different ways. And on the background of your research of profilicity, what I'm fascinated with is something that seems to experience not in my generation, but in the younger generation. They have an amazing, fascinating way to deal with authenticity that's different for us to grasp, and they don't grasp because they don't care about it at all. They have, I would say, a really ironical, detached way to deal with authenticity. They combine references in ways that for us would be impossible. They refer to different terminology. They are really postmodern. They build an identity without any respect for context, for authenticity in a sense, which is, if something is authentic, is the way they combine the most disparate materials in a new innovative way, which has nothing to do with our traditional idea of authenticity. My expression, they are experimenting. You can call it profilicity or as you want, but it's not a new development of something we did before. Or to go back to something you're referring to, I don't think it's a new form of a second-order observation, because second-order observation exists in our society since long. Think about George Herbert Mead, the idea we observe each other, we observe ourselves through the eyes of the other since at least 1 century. What they are doing now is something different. They sort of observe this way of observing themselves and make fun of that. Right. And that's it, or make fun, or in a serious way. They deal with that. They have a more detached attitude to that, which I think is enormously fascinating.
Yes, I fully agree on that. I just want to go back once more to this authenticity, profilicity difference. Going back to the same example, I mean, like the traditional idea is on the authenticity mode, whatever, I go to the museum and I want to have this kind of authentic experience by watching this wonderful work of art and engaging with it and resonating, and it resonates with me, and I somehow build my inner self in dialogue with the work of art there, right? And then the profilicity thing, or the same thing, like you say, the people, they go to the museum, but they don't even look at the painting, right? And they just post the photo. And so again, that's because there is a different mode of identity building going on there, because here the person is, as in the authenticity mode, goes to the museum because they want to have an identity experience. They want to build their identity, but just not in the mode of authenticity. They want to build it in the mode of profilicity. But the investment is somehow the same, going back to the example with the Grand Canyon. I mean, the four hours of hiking are the same for the person who does it thinking that they're having this authentic hiking experience, and then have this as a reward, have this awesome view and this unity with nature, or, you know, awe experience that somehow resonates with their inner self. Whereas the other person then has the objective that they are somehow engaged in their identity work by making this a part of their curated profile. And so I think the two things are not really compatible, because if you say, okay, what the person does is not authentic, then you're missing what they're actually doing, because they're not trying to be authentic in the first place. That's one thing that I wanted to say. And the second thing is that we're overestimating, sorry if I'm repeating myself, our own authenticity, because, and that I hope resonates to what you said at the end, because we're also operating in the mode of profilicity. We've never really been purely authentic, and you and I are not even purely authentic right now. We're also somehow having this conversation in order to post it. And that is something that we very intentionally, did. So, that brings me again back to the question of the algorithms and what are algorithms actually doing and how do they actually function. So my hunch is that algorithms somehow function, I'm using a metaphor, like mirrors functioned in earlier identity context, right? Whatever, in a sincerity context where you're role-oriented, you need a mirror to see if you're properly dressed, right? If you're properly dressed as a woman, or if you're properly dressed as a teacher, professor, or whatever, right? So you have to look into the mirror to see that how you look somehow supports your identity in the form of your role. That was a function of the mirror, right? That's why mirrors were important. Now, again, I have somehow a hunch that algorithms, again, they neither support a sincere identity mode, nor do they support an authentic identity mode, but they support, similar as a mirror supports as a technology, the identity mode of sincerity, or perhaps also of authenticity. Algorithms support the identity mode of profilicity in a similar way like mirrors operated in previous identity technologies, because again, they give us feedback. They give us feedback and they about the functioning of our profile identity. And that's why we somehow need them, and why we somehow want them, and why we use them all the time, right? That they somehow confirm our identity, right? Somehow the news and the videos and that are being offered to me, and the products that are being offered to me, or the comments that my viewers will post on this website, they somehow all contribute to mirroring and thereby confirming my profile to me, which I cannot have simply by looking in a mirror, right? I don't need a mirror. That the mirror doesn't help me to create my profile. So that's why it's a question to you. Isn't perhaps one form of the function of algorithm as tools of artificial communication, that they help the creation of profile identity, and that's why we cherish them so much, and why we use them so often, and why we communicate with them.
Yeah. About the last question, I would definitely think there's a very productive way to look at the way algorithm works. But I would form some aspects slightly different, but the background is very similar. You might have noticed I never speak about authenticity. Even the kind about the photographs, I think about escaping the present, which doesn't mean escape authenticity. So authenticity is much more than that. So what we are saying now, the question is how to build our identity, and we need mirror for identity. I definitely agree. But authenticity is a very, as you also say, slippery concept, because we might feel that we are our authentic self, like look at a picture in a museum. But of course, perfectly wrote about that. There's nothing authentic about that, because we see ourselves watching the picture, because that picture is something which culturally is important for our reference. So now I'm here about this thing of which I knew already a lot before. So in this moment, I'm copying someone or referring to something external, and then I can feel authentic. Right. And that's why there's such a complicated notion. And the mirror is also strange for that, because that's the reason this reflective aspect of authenticity is the reason why the very concept of authenticity is a typical modern concept. Authenticity began in the 18th century when we still had this widespread presence of communication in the form of a printing press. So the culture was so present in every aspect of our life, that we always build ourselves referring to this cultural reference that was circulating. So the way we go to the museum and watch the picture. In the 13th century, people didn't go to watch Giotto in this way. No? It was a real direct experience, which is not authentic because it didn't mean anything for them to be authentic. It didn't exist before. So that's how I would use your interesting image of the mirror, because of course the mirror, think about Narcissus, so the mirror is there in order to reflect ourselves. No? But we can reflect our identity or we can reflect our individuality. So if the first forms of mirror, or a little child, you see yourself from outside. You simply see that. But that's not necessarily a second-order observation. You just have another perspective. You see yourself from your perspective from another point of view. You couldn't see your bag. So that's a different thing. And the way you are describing the cultural products as mirrors to reflect our authenticity is much more. It's not you're reflecting identity, you're reflecting your individuality, your reflected identity. The mirrors in our mass media culture are there to allow us to reflect not our identity, but how we see ourselves. That's a sort of second order kind of observation, which is the basis of our strange way of feeling ourselves, which also required authenticity, all these contradictory, fascinating concepts. And what's going on with algorithms, I'm wondering, is, I would agree with you, is something new, but on this line, are the mirror of what? I would not say for individuality, maybe a new kind of identity that new generation are building in a more flexible way. That's why, for example, you can have multiple identities. You know, the research that David Stark and Giovanni Formilan are doing on using aliases and so on, and or the idea that the circulating idea since long in the web, nobody knows you are a dog or something. We are playing with different identities, and it's not clear which individuality comes out of the combination of the different identities. Our generation, will think about an authenticity, but I think it's completely outdated. It's not accurate anymore. I have the impression that these young people are experimenting with a different way of combining these identities, not necessarily in a clear individuality at the end. They are just experimenting.
That's fascinating, Elena. I think we're running out of time. So thanks a lot again for talking to me. And I hope the video will encourage our viewers to check out your book. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Georg. It was really interesting.
Okay. Bye-bye. Let me stop the recording.